Today, I want to begin in chapter 3 of Hebrews. There's an instruction that is given, and it's an instruction that the church needs to hear today. And it simply says, fix your eyes on Jesus. We begin 2023. What better instruction, counsel could we receive from the Word of God than what the writer of Hebrews wrote so many years ago? Fix your eyes on Jesus. So we'll do some of that as we ask the question who he is. Now, in the context of chapter 3, there are two functions that we're to think about Jesus Christ. One is he is the apostle, and two is he is the high priest. This is latent with explosion. This is like a mine placed by the roadside. When you step on this activity of focusing on Jesus as the sent one of God and as the high priest, it's incredible what has to be blown up and destroyed to make way for the new. And it's this lack of fixation on Jesus that's going to cause the problem in chapter 5. I don't know if you've ever been a teacher. Gail came home from school in Oklahoma City one time. She said to me, she had a piano lab class, K through 6th grade, and she's teaching piano. She came home and she said, today I said, put your left thumb, okay, the right thumb, put that thumb on middle C. And no one did an activity. And so she said, what's the problem? And the little boy raises his hand. He says, which is my left? They didn't know the left from the right, so they couldn't carry out. Now, the little child wasn't doing anything morally that would impede his learning. He simply didn't know his left from his right. So, but that's not the problem in chapter 5. In chapter 5, the writer says, you are impeding. Impeding means to block. You have stopped learning. So it's important to make a correlation in your thinking. Fix your mind on Jesus as apostle, the sent one, and the high priest, so that you will stop blocking the learning that is occurring. Now, I'm going to bring up a chart in a moment and survey the problem for the Jewish convert to Christ.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Your voice is low. Your voice is very low. I don't know.
All right, let me move forward a little bit. I have a little bit of sinus drainage, and that may does that help?
No.
Does that help, Campa? Can you hear
Little,
me? Is that a little better?
yeah, a little better.
Okay. All right, let me just make sure. I think I'm all the way up. Yeah, I'm maxed out on my, let me see. Is that better? Is that
Not
better? Not much?
Not much. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I have to, Chuck, we have to select. Are we using the sound out of the laptop or out of the monitor? That's I think the problem. I need to select the sound being picked up by my monitor. Okay, so.
Sir, it sound good to us. It's
Okay,
clear.
all right, good. So the problem is going to be is what is blocking the student's ability to learn? Gail came home, I was going to say, she came home from the same school one day and she said, I have a master's plus 30 hours of schooling. And she said, I spent 8 hours at school today. I don't think I spent any time on my subject of music. She said, I had to spend the day dealing with discipline problems. The students were blocking the ability to learn by their behavior. So she couldn't focus on her subject. The writer is saying, you will have men in your congregation and women, and they are blocking the ability to learn. You can do everything possible, but if they choose to bring their will against you and not accept your teaching, it's blocked. So what is it that's possible that causes these men and the readers to block the learning, to stop the learning that he speaks of in chapter 5? Well, it's this: fix your eyes on whom? Jesus, the what? The author, I mean, not author, but the apostle and the high priest. Now, so briefly, I'm going to back up in just a moment. So the apostle basically means a sent one, a messenger. Now, remember chapter 1, in times past, God spoke through whom? The prophets, correct? But in the last days, he's spoken through whom? His son, see, right? So that you bring that, you go back to chapter 1 and verse 2, and you bring that forward. God has spoken through his what? His son. So that's going to illustrate that God is speaking. And as you know, in chapter 1, the 7 quotations, they all address the Lord Jesus Christ, incarnate or post-incarnate, resurrected. They speak about him. So the problem is going to be that you have a conflict. And who is the potential conflict? And let me bring up this chart, and I think you'll see part of the dilemma that they're having. Sorry, my old eyes, you guys. Wrong one. Okay, yeah. Can you see that?
No, sir.
You can't see that. Okay.
It's shadow. It's like shadow, sir.
We can see it, but it's blurry.
Wow, it's so clear with me. Just a moment. Let me do it again. Now, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, I want you to think with me. You are a Jewish person. Let's take the Apostle Peter. Peter was born into a Jewish family. Then when you get over to Acts chapter 10, and you have a sheet that comes down from heaven. And what's in the sheet? Unclean what?
Animals.
Unclean animals.
Animals, sir. Animals.
And what is Peter told by God to do?
What God has made clean is clean.
Yeah, don't call unclean what I call clean. And he was told to eat of these unclean animals. And what did he say to God? He said to God, no, not since my childhood. Maybe the man's 25 years old, 30 years old. He says, I have never eaten unclean. Now notice the principle. In Leviticus 11, around say 1446, God gave to Moses the Levitical food laws. Are you with me?
Yes.
Now you drop down 400 plus years, say 470 years, or say 500 years. Now God says to Peter, eat. Now notice the principle. Later revelation supersedes, takes precedent over previous revelation. The revelation of 1446 BC is canceled. It's replaced by Acts chapter 10. All food is clean to eat. The food laws are canceled. You see what? Now Peter has to do what? He's got to go and evangelize some Gentiles, but he can't. If you can't eat with a person because of your religion, you can't evangelize them. That wall has to be ripped down. I think I may have told you a story that happened to me. I had an acquaintance in working my master's in Oklahoma, in Binghamton, New York, at the university, and so it was a 1 o'clock class, 1 to 3, during the week, couple of days, and so one day we go there, and the class is postponed, and it won't start until 3 o'clock. So I said to my acquaintance, I want to use the word friend, but I can't use that word legally, actually. So I said, let's go have some pizza. And he says, I can't. And I thought, oh, well, okay, if you don't, I'm buying. It's my treat. I'll buy. He says, I can't. And then I said, why? And he looked at me sorrowfully and said, I'm Jewish. Now, what happened to our friendship? Did it grow or did it just cease? It ceased. If you can't, so your laws can block your fellowship. Now, so that's only a small sample of the problem. Every Jew is faced with this issue about the existence of the law. Now, what I want to do, take a look now at this chart. There are 3 Old Testament ministries. This is prepared for chapter 5, but chapter 5 is built upon the problem of looking at Jesus. So when you look at Jesus, you have to look away from somebody. You have to give up looking at someone. All of us that are married, Jay, I don't know how I know he met his wife because she came to church. Brian Martin is a friend in Oklahoma City, and he's a music director in a church, and he was a bachelor. Campa, we always said about Brian, when he led the music, he had one eye on God and one eye on the visiting single girls. So, but all of us, especially once we are selected a mate to marry, where's our focus? It's always on our wives and not on other women. Our attention, is there. So we have to give up something when we choose our wives. We choose to focus only on one person in our life. So now notice here are the 3 major ministries in the Old Testament. Okay. First of all, I pick up the word priest first in this order. This seems to be the developing order in the Old Testament. It's the first time I put this together, but mentally I've had this idea and I wanted to think through it. So first of all, there are 3 offices: priest, and then what? King, and then what? Prophet. Next to our home in Oklahoma City was a couple, a Jewish couple, and I had a friend, and I got a job for him to come over and do something, repair their house. And make a long story short, the Jewish couple divorces. Her mother was Methodist and her dad was Jewish. So, and then the Jewish lady and my friend married, and they work at, Bethany. Chuck may know the Jewish ministry there. So her dad was down, and I wanted a chance to visit with him. And so he came to my home. He's very, a businessman. He was quite up in years. He was in his 70s, and he came to my home, and a story was related to me. He said, one day, Mary was her name. She said, Jesus Christ and he got all upset. Why did he get upset? He told her, never, never, never take the name Jesus and associate it with the word Christ. Now tell me, how would a Jewish man focus on Christ, see, who has that attitude that, that Jesus should never be associated, he's not the Christ. Well, now look and see what the writer of Hebrews is going to do. He's going to take the office of priest and give it to Jesus Christ. He's going to take the office of king and give it to Jesus Christ. He's going to take the office of prophet and give it to Jesus Christ. Let me give you one more chart here that I really, it's a,
Sir, here one doubt.
yes, go ahead.
You wrote that Jeremiah as priest. I don't know where he acted as priest.
Good. Yeah, now what I want to show you, that's, I'll delay what I was going to do and pick up on where Campa is heading. Thank you, Campa, for understanding the intent of the chart. Okay.
Yes.
So first of all, let's start not with Jeremiah, let's start with Moses.
Wow.
Are you with me?
Yes.
Now, Moses, I pick up there, see the priest, let's take the first leg and say priest. So now when you go to Joshua 18, verse 7, I found that verse last night. I was looking for another one where God takes the religious responsibilities. Every man of a household was the priest for his family, like in Genesis 4. Later, that responsibility of being a priest is transferred to the Levites. So I wanted that reference in there. But the Joshua works. In Joshua, then the responsibility for these spiritual duties are transferred to the Levites, one of the 12 sons, right? So now notice that Moses is a what? A descendant of Levi. He's a priest. Who offers sacrifices? Moses. So you have to, and in Leviticus 8, Moses appoints Aaron the first high priest. So a Levitical priest appoints his brother under God's direction to be the Aaronic high priest, the first high priest. But now notice in Hebrews chapter 1, you see the word prophet there at the bottom? See that little leg, those 3 legs down there? They're there for a reason. When you go to Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 1, in the past, God spoke through what? Our forefathers through the what?
True prophets.
Prophets. Now you get 7 illustrations in chapter 1. Who are the prophets through whom God spoke in chapter 1?
Yes.
The first one is
Lord Jesus.
David, Psalm 2. The second one is Nathan, Samuel, 2 Samuel 7. The third is Moses, Deuteronomy 32:43. Now, what does the writer of Hebrews call Moses? He calls him what? A prophet. So one of the things that became clear as I was working last night, Campo, is that you can have a one person be a priest and also function as a prophet. But what's clear is, you see, that the priest never becomes the king and the prophet never becomes the king. But you will find that a priest like Moses will have both functions. Now, a prophet is one who receives revelation from God, records it, and either speaks it or writes it for God's intended recipients. So you can say the 5 books of Moses acted as a what? Prophet. So I'm building a case, Campa, so that when you come to Jeremiah, all you have to say is where is he identified as being a priest? And I working on this late last night. What he's identified from the city which he comes from. He was of the priestly tribe, priestly ministry. I'll add that in there so you can have that reference. But do you see what I'm saying? Now you come down to a prophet. Now David is identified as a prophet. Look how many Psalms he wrote. And yet he doesn't do the priestly ministry.
Yes.
So what the reason I put Jeremiah there as priest and prophet is to show that Jeremiah is to us one of the 5 major prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, except Lamentations. So you have so those are classified in our mind as the 5 major prophets. Is it right we have 13 minor prophets? Is that correct? When I'm working, sometimes I'm working with 50-year-old material in my brain. And I don't know when was the last time I counted the minor prophets, but somewhere in my memory, I said there was 13. So you may want to check me
No,
on
there
that.
are 12.
12?
Only
Yeah.
Oh, good. All right, good. Thank you. I'll correct that before it's put out, right? And this will come out in the. But now, do you see? We've got 3 offices. We got priest and king and prophet. And I thought it's very interesting that priests sometimes function also as prophets, and that a prophet sometimes could also be a descendant of a priest. All right. So you see what I'm trying to do, Campa? Where you have a priest who functions as the priest and a prophet. And I'll find the reference for you. I knew I had to do it. And when I get tired, my whole eye gets tired, sometimes I just quit. I mean, it's a programmed activity in my mind that I have to do. So I'll look that up. It'll be added to the charts, and I'll do some more numbering on this. But to keep track, you see the priest, the king, and the prophets. So if I said to you, and you're a Jewish man, who is the greatest of the Old Testament prophets? And you would say whom? Moses, right? And if you were like the writer of Hebrews, you'd say, well, boy, that may be true, but I rank Moses, David up there as such an important. Look at the revelation from God that he received when he wrote all of those Psalms and all. And if you think about Hebrews chapter 1 through 3, and you find out there's 5 quotations of David in chapter 1, 2 in chapter 2, and 1 in chapter 3. Crucial, major structural support for Hebrews based upon the writings of this prophet, David. So David is one of our prophets. So now I want to be able to now focus our attention. Sorry, that's so now put in place 3rd chapter, verse 1 of Hebrews. Fix your eyes on whom?
The apostle and prophet.
Yeah. Now, what he's saying is, get the duster off of the chalkboard. Jay, I know you know what a duster is. Doug, a duster is an eraser in India.
Yes.
You don't ask for an eraser, you ask for the duster. When I asked for the eraser, the class sat there, they did nothing. And I looked at the board, and finally, it dawned on me, hey, I don't know English. And so they came up, and then I'm looking for the trash can. There was no trash can, but there was one. It had another name.
Dustbin.
Dustbin. But we would never guess that, So anyway, I had to be educated in India and learn English. So they're words. But to stay focused here, we're asked to dust off Aaron as high priest, erasing. We're asked to dust off any king other than Christ. We're asked to set aside any conflict in our mind, and that we have the greatest of all in one person. Let me just find bear with me just a moment. Okay. Now, fix your eyes on Jesus. Can you see that? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, notice what happened.
Okay. Sacrifice, priest, prophet, and king. He's priest and sacrifice.
Oops. Oops. I just got caught. I didn't group it together.
There we go.
Chuck hasn't had a chance to play with this yet. Now, look, when he's talking about focus your eyes on Jesus, look at the extreme difficulty if you're a Jew. The son became what? The sacrifice. Now, look, what does that mean? Let's say you're 30 years old. Every year you went up to Jerusalem at the time of Passover. What are you learning? Don't go to Jerusalem. You don't need to go for the annual sacrifice. Who has replaced all of that sacrificial worship? Who has? The Son.
Jesus, the Son.
And that's what's going to be interesting. Second, now, not only has he replaced all of the sacrifices, the morning sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice, the annual sacrifice, Leviticus 16 sacrifice, he also has become what?
Priest.
High priest.
You can give up the false priest that's usurped the priesthood in Israel. You don't need, turn away from a Jewish priest. Now, what if your neighbor is the rabbi and he believes in Moses, but he doesn't believe in Jesus? You know, and then look. Not only is he the sacrifice, he's the what? He's the one who offers the sacrifice. The priest is the sacrifice. Now, in every religion, you have the priest, the believer, and the sacrifice. But not in Christianity. Notice what happened. The sacrifice and the priest are one. First the sacrifice, and after the sacrifice, then the resurrected Christ takes his atonement to heaven, to the presence of God the Father. Third, now notice, who is Jesus said, he's speaking of Jonah, he says, a greater than Jonah is here. A greater prophet than Jonah is here. So Jesus is becoming, I gave you a couple of references. I'll probably expand these. But so Jesus is the prophet. Now, and you want to know, they look for forever for the coming Messiah. And now they're told what? That Jesus, the rejected, crucified one, is none other. Do you see what I'm trying to illustrate? When it says, fix your eyes on Jesus. Now, if we were in a classroom and I was your teacher, I would say, when you came into class today, I would say, take out your pencil and paper, put your name in the upper right, put today's date, and put the word test. Question number 1. What comes to your mind when the writer of Hebrews says, fix your eyes on Jesus? And I really want to know, is there indifference in your thinking? Are you indifferent towards God? Are you indifferent towards the God of the Bible? Are you indifferent to the God of Hebrews? So what comes to your mind? And if you don't have down there 1 through 9, then I'm going to say, perhaps you are experiencing an attitude of being indifferent towards God. You're not using your mind. You're not using your will. For some reason, you're sitting back on your hiney, and you're not learning the 9 claims of Christ. You have not fixed your mind on Christ if, 1, you don't know he's God's human son. 2, you don't know that he's the heir of all things. You are doing your whole life spent trying to get more real estate, and you're going to die and leave it to someone else. You are not heir to that real estate. Christ is heir to that real estate. But your focus is not on Christ as the heir of all things. That's future, see? And you can't live in light of the future. That's indifference. How many times do I not hear from the pulpit, Christ is the creator? Sunday I heard, and we have a good minister, but he made God the Father the creator, and he never ascribed that creation to Christ. Why can't we elevate Christ, the human son, to the rank of full deity? So if you don't meditate upon Christ as being the creator of all things, then you're different. You have not fixed your eyes. So if you don't have facts, you can't fix your eyes. If I say you need the multiplication tables, you need to know something simple like 2 times 2 or 12 times 12 is 144. Now, so somewhere along the line, I fixed 12 times 12 as being 144. So today, Bob Long doesn't have to sit and calculate and add 12 to 12, and that's 24 and 36 and 48 and 60 and 72 and 84 and 96. I don't have to go that way to figure out 12 times. I've got an answer hooked into my mind where I can jump right from the problem to the solution. So if you're going to fix your mind on Jesus, you have to do some work. And I can't believe how lazy, indifferent we've given poison to the church members so that when they come, they don't use their will. They do nothing. They come in, they bow their head, they ask Jesus into their heart, which they can't accomplish, and they sit down in the church, and then they don't work at memorizing the scripture, learning who Christ is. They don't make this progress. Why? Something wrong with our educational system in the church. So the writer of Hebrews says, look, 4 things are happening. And when you read Hebrews, if you love the Aaronic priesthood, you're going to be really disappointed in the book of Hebrews. If you love the Aaronic priest, you're going to be disappointed to sacrifice the priest. And if you place and don't understand that all of those Old Testament prophets pointed to one great final prophet, the Lord Jesus, Deuteronomy 18:15, and at the time of the giving of the law, the Lord Jesus Christ, pre-incarnate, is on the mountain, thunder and lightning, and he gives the 10 commandments. And when he's communicated to Israel, they've already disobeyed. He said, when the trumpet sounds, come up the mountain. The trumpet sounded, Deuteronomy 5:5, and the people were so afraid they would not come up the mountain. They trembled. Fear replaced faith. They couldn't trust God. So in Deuteronomy 20:18 and 19, or 19 and 20, there's a very interesting verse. They go and they said, Moses, never let God speak directly to us. Give us a mediator. The Mosaic law did not bring Israel close to God. It forced them to say, give us a mediator. Here's God, there's a mediator, and then here's us. We don't want to deal directly with God. The law drove Israel away from God and didn't attract them. It wasn't like a magnet that suddenly you take a magnet and you put it over a tack, a nail, and boom, it grabs it. No, it had the opposite effect. It drove Israel away. They asked for a mediator. 40 years later, Deuteronomy 18:15, 40 years later, God answered that question, that request. He said, I'm going to give you a prophet like Moses. It's going to be like Moses. And him you hear, you listen to him. So in John chapter 6, when Jesus feeds the 5,000, and the people hear him teaching, and he feeds the 5,000, what do they say to one another? Hey, isn't this the prophet that Moses wrote about? So they see that Jesus, for example, Moses fed the population, but they want him to continue to feed it just like Moses did. Moses was a great teacher. Jesus was a great teacher. Moses was a miracle worker. Jesus was a miracle worker. They see something about Jesus, and they want to take him by force and make him a king. So they think that he's this conqueror like Moses who destroyed Israel's enemies. So they want him in John 6. This is the chapter where Judas fails. Judas sees that Jesus is not going to establish an earthly kingdom at this time, and so he abandons and starts stealing from the church 1 year prior to betraying Jesus. But so the point is, he's that prophet. In Deuteronomy 18:15, God gave an answer to their request. When the law separated them, he said, I'm going to give you a prophet. And what do they do with the prophet that God gave them? Tragically, sadly, they crucified him. But Jesus is that prophet, and he's that ultimate king. And we know we studied Psalm 2, 2 Samuel 7, Psalm 89. There's just so many great promises that Jesus is going to be. So now notice what's happened. All of the Old Testament has now been redirected, and your focus now is not to see grain and animal sacrifices. They're gone. We have one sacrifice, one eternal sacrifice. 2, you have to give up, you can give up the priesthood. We have one priest, only one. You know, the Church of Rome has a problem. There's one mediator between God and man, and it's the one. It is the Holy Mary, Mother of God, intercede for us now at the time of our death. See, it's only one, priest. We have one who's given us final interpretation from the scriptures, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ. And he's teaches us about a salvation that's yet to come. And we've got one great king that's coming. I hope can you sense how a Jewish convert would really be tempted? How much they have to give up? What a radical change. What a radical change has to occur in the mind of men who are in Jewish persuasion. They have to let Jesus become the sacrifice, the priest, the prophet, and the king. So what does it mean then to focus, your attention on Jesus with 2 primary functions that he's doing? One, I'm sorry that's my glucose alarm and I need to put it in another room. And so Jesus then becomes these 4 for us, and our focus is upon him. So that means that we will take him. Now, as you move forward, let me see what time we have. So as you move forward in chapter 3, so immediately you're going to run into a comparison of Jesus, the Son, to Moses. So if you think in terms of Moses as a prophet, and you look at 5 books of the Old Testament, I mean, he looms large in the mind of a Jew. I don't know if you've observed, but when you read John's Gospel, when you get to chapter 1 and verse 17, in one verse, one small verse, John sets aside Moses. He has set, the word became flesh, in John 1:14, right? Well, in verse 17, with one verse, he simply says, the law came by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. So John sets aside Moses with one verse. Moses brought the law, and the law brings wrath. But Jesus came. When he came, he brought truth. He brought the interpretation of all of those symbolic sacrifices in the Old Testament. He brought truth, grace, and he brought forgiveness of sins. Moses couldn't bring forgiveness of sins because the law couldn't forgive sin. But here, Christ he brought. So what John did with one verse, the writer of Hebrews is doing the same thing. He's saying, that Jesus Christ is the one. Moses brought 5 books, but Jesus Christ is the one message for interpreting. So if you're on the road with the 2 men and suddenly Jesus appears and he's walking with you, beginning with the Old Testament, what does he do?
Explain the scriptures.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have to let Jesus be the one who explains those scriptures. That's why the writer of Hebrews would know, because Jesus's disciples were taught by him how to interpret correctly the Old Testament. So the first activity then is, so then when you get into chapter 3, there's going to be an analogy. It's going to be a contrast between Jesus and Moses. And guess what? The basic analogy is, it's the analogy of a house. In Oklahoma City, my home was built by O.A. Gar. He's the builder. But when the house was built and I moved in, who was the owner? I'm the owner. Who has access to the house? Only I do. The builder, he was the servant. He didn't have access to the house. Moses is nothing more than a servant, and Jesus is the builder of the house. Now, this is where you need 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 13, 14. And he is the one who will build a house for me. So in 2 Samuel 7, you had 3 definitions of the word house. You had the word house as a physical building like David's temple. 2, you had the word house like verse 11 and 12, where it means dynasty. A dynasty of kings' sons succeeding their father. But 3rd, it has to do with a body of spiritual people. So Jesus Christ, God is interested not in Solomon's temple, which was destroyed. He's not interested. He reached this destination of Jesus as the dynasty, that last dynastic king. So that goal was to reach. The others were set aside. And so Jesus is building a house. And guess who is one of the members of that house? That's Moses. So Jesus Christ, if you can imagine, saves Moses. Who is greater? The one who's saved or the one saving? Jesus Christ makes Moses a member of his house. So that's showing you the degree that a Jew has to abandon Moses. This lady that lived next to us said, if I have to give up Moses, then I'll just give up Jesus. And you know what I say? Yeah, that's exactly right. If Moses has etched out any room that belongs to Jesus, you've got to get rid of Moses. And that's what he's doing here. The servant of the house. Maybe you have someone that, yes, sir.
On that series called The Chosen, Jesus tells his father, I am the law of Moses.
Oh, interesting. So meaning he's the interpretation of the law of Moses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doug, I've got a lot of catching up on all of season 3. So I'm going to have to do that one of these days. Yeah. All right. So we have then, but you see how this is going to work. He's going to make a comparison. The reason he's going to say focus on Jesus, because it's not Moses that's going to be the important, giving you 5 books. It's going to be Jesus interpreting Moses that gives you the proper focus for your belief. So Moses is a servant in God's house. Christ is over God's house as the builder, but God is the builder of everything. So we start out with him that the writer is saying to his readers, you have got to replace Moses with Jesus. So when you get to chapter 5, you learn that that's not happened. And it's blocking their understanding. They reach a point and they say, if I accept this, I have to give up Moses. Well, they reach a point where they say, I don't know. They retarded themselves. They've slowed themselves down. They quit learning. And they have to be rebuked by the writer. And some have abandoned their faith and given up Jesus and gone back to Moses. So we have this focus then. And then what's the second major point to focus on? That he's high priest. Now, you'll get a little bit of that in chapter 5. I hope you're enjoying reading during the week, Hebrews. You ought to read it. I wish I were reading it fully every day. I read parts of it every day, but not all of it. I wish I was reading it through every day. It's such a wonderful book. When you get to chapter 7, you have a flower, the bud comes out and it begins to open and you see a little bit of the leaves. There's a tree around the corner when I walk the dogs and it's purple. It has the most gorgeous leaves, but that begins to open but it's not fully open yet. And then when it opens like this, it's just absolutely, it's like a hand with fingers and they're all purple and they're just gorgeous. Well, that's what happens. You get the bud right here, Jesus, the high priest. But when you get to chapter 5, it opens up about halfway. Then when you get to chapter 7, you have a full-blown, he ever lives to make intercession for us. And then you have the development of Psalm 110, verse 4. Thou art a priest for what? Forever.
Order of Melchizedek.
Yeah. Do you know the requirement? That there are more than one, but you know the chief requirement for being a Melchizedekian high priest? Real simple. You have to have the power of a resurrected life. So the writer of Hebrews knows that once Christ was raised from the dead, he qualified to become Israel's high priest. Now he also had to be king, so he had to be from the tribe of Judah. So in Psalm 110, he is king. In verse 4, he's appointed high priest. So when you get to chapter 7, we're going to see this blossoming of this idea. And then then you learn so clearly, you'll learn that not only was he the priest, but he first became the sacrifice. He could not be a priest on the earth because he wasn't from Aaron's. He wasn't from Levi, he was from Judah. So he had no ministry as a priest on earth. After his death, he was qualified in resurrection. He was qualified to become the king and priest for us. And so chapter 7, he's the sacrifice and he's the priest. He's the sacrifice and they're one. They're not two separate things. In all religions, the priest is different from the sacrifice. No, not here. The sacrifice is the priest, becomes the priest. And he's also our final prophet and final king. So you'll see in chapter 7 this wonderful flowering that Jesus ever lives to become our mediator, our high priest. So the writer is really, he knows where he's going with his audience. So he's saying, you open the door and see what's inside. You look at the blackboard and it says, fix your eyes on Jesus. And 2 major points. What are the 2 points that you fix your eyes on? 1, that he's the apostle, the sent one. And 2, he's the what? High priest. And once you acknowledge that, you no longer need Moses. You no longer need Aaron. You no longer need grain offerings. You no longer need the annual sacrifice on the Day of Atonement. All of that's been accomplished in one person. So you abandon, and you imagine they're having to abandon their childhood religion. It's got to be really hard. It's like a Hindu giving up all of his training and becoming a Christian. He has to abandon all of his gods. I have an Indian friend in Oklahoma, He's now back in Minnesota, and he was an engineer with Seagate Hard Drive Corporation. Ultimately, he went back to seminary after his 5 kids were grown, and now he's pastoring. But he came to my house one day in Oklahoma, and we were getting ready for, or had just had a missions conference across town at one of the churches. And when I did a missions conference for India, we would have a table, we'd have a booth, and I would bring in all of these gods, quote, Hindu gods, icons, I'd bring them in, I'd set them up on the table. Well, I had them on the piano in my living room at home. And so when my friend came in, he was petrified. He didn't want to stay in my living room because he said, Bob, do you understand? I used to worship all of these gods. I used to take offerings around to the temple. Get them out of here. I can't stand it. He said, I feel like Satan is here. He had to abandon, all of that to come to Christ, and he did. What a wonderful conversion. He won't be in a room very long until he lets you know he's a Christian. And so he's a great evangelist. By the way, Sukumar, he's from a state in India, north of you. And so he was the oldest uncle, the only remaining uncle, and his niece got married. So he had to come back. I think the state starts with S. But he had to come back and give the niece away in the wedding ceremony. And the wedding ceremony lasted 7 days.
Oh.
And the reason I remember this wedding ceremony, do you know how much the dowry was? The dowry from the bride's family to the groom's family was $5 million. I mean, a huge.
$5 million.
Yes.
Oof.
I mean, so of course, that's his relatives' money, not his money. But I remember, but now can you imagine if they want, and he shared his faith with them while he's there, they would have to abandon their Hinduism to come to Christ. You can't keep your gods. One of the things that Catholic Church does is it lets you keep your gods and take Jesus as another God. But you have to abandon all of those gods and come to Christ. The point is, this is what's happening for a Jew. We need to have some great appreciation for the struggle that a Jew would have to come to Christ. God has to open their eyes and let them see that Christ is creator and he is heir of all things. Okay.
Sir, only sir.
Yeah.
The son become prophet, that Muslim people only refer this only this verse, Deuteronomy 18:15. Because Muslim people said that Jesus means the son, Jesus was a prophet. So this means along of this side, sacrifice, priest and king, they did not mention. They only mention the prophet.
Well, just, okay. Remember now the structure of Hebrews, chapter 1 and verse 5 and 6. What's the first Old Testament quotation? It's not Deuteronomy. What's the first quotation? It's Psalm 2. And you establish in Psalm 2 through the prophet David that God has a human son. And second, to back that up, you go to 2 Samuel 7. God has a human son. Third, you go to Deuteronomy 32:43, and there you learn that human son is also deity, the God man. Now, when you go to, you need to link Deuteronomy 18:15. If you don't have this in your mind, draw a circle around Deuteronomy 18:15 and put to the side Exodus chapter 20, verses 18 and 19. God says to Moses, that people in Exodus 20, they say, don't speak to us, let God speak directly to us.
Yeah.
Mediator. So that means put someone between God and Israel. So the law drove Israel further away from God. It didn't attract them. It separated them. And every time there's a law added, there's more and more distance between God and the people. So when you have 613 laws, the purpose is to show that there's an enormous stack of paper that divides God from Israel. Close to Chuck's house in Oklahoma City, there's a Christian college, and they have a business outreach, and you go in for an exhibit, and they have, say, the year 1925 and say the year 2022. And they have physically a stack of laws from 1922 and 2022. The stack of laws would be 12 feet high in 2022 and only an inch tall in 1922. I mean, here's a visual exhibit where the citizen is further and further separated from his ability to even do proper relationship to the law. How's he going to know all of these laws? So in Exodus 20, the law separated. You got to get that point. The law separated, put fear in the hearts of people, because if they don't obey, they're going to perish. That thunder and lightning is going to bring them under judgment. Now, so they make a request in 1446 BC when they're at the Mount Sinai. 40 years later, at the end of Moses' life, and in Deuteronomy 18, at the end of his life, God comes and says, watch very carefully how this is interpreted, Jay. You know, one like Moses. So now, so when you teach John 6, you want to do this, you say, okay, how can Jesus appear in the minds of the men who were there that ate the food? How can he appear to be like Moses? So I would say to you, did Muhammad feed 5,000 men, Jay? No, he didn't. Moses, I can't hear you.
Jesus fed the 5,000, but no. Moses
That's right. But the question is, did Muhammad feed the 5,000?
No.
Right. So he's not like Moses.
Right.
I'm trying to give you interpretation. See, so if you want to find the likeness, you say, okay, here's Moses. Oh, here's a two columns. The heading says Moses, and the second column says Jesus. So the first question is over on the left. You say, did the person feed the 5,000? And you put no under Muhammad, and you put yes under Jesus, right? You know, second, you're going to say, is he like Moses? Look at the behavior, the life of Moses, and compare him, and then compare Jesus Christ. Muhammad won't be like him. Now, he's going to have to be of the Jewish faith. Now, so he's going to have to be like Moses in his ancestry. So I asked the question, Muhammad, now Muhammad comes from what son of Abraham? Ishmael. And what grandson of Abraham? Come on, you know this. It's you know it, Sukumar. Starts with an E. Esau.
Esau.
Oh, Esau, yeah.
Remember, Esau, in anger against his father,
Yeah.
he goes and takes a wife from whom? His uncle.
From Ishmael. Yeah.
Right? And so they become the parents of the Arabs. They become the parents of those, so that's where, so you can't bring Muhammad later, see, that's where they make a mistake. It's not Ishmael that's the ancestor.
Yeah.
It's Isaac, and that's what Genesis 17 is all about, is that you have to show that this one that's going to come is of the ancestry of Jacob. And then Genesis 49:10 is Muhammad of Judah? No. See, this prophet is going to be not from even Levi. He's going to be
Judah.
from Judah. But I mean, you can work through, but I mean, that's important. When you understand what they say, then you have to have an answer to be able to say, let me teach Genesis 16 and show where Ishmael comes from a handmaiden, and show where she's driven out and she's not an heir, and then show where God does bless her. But in Genesis 17, Abraham places Ishmael underneath the Abrahamic covenant, that is submission to Isaac, who's going to be born, and he's still a year away before he comes out of the womb. So it's very important to get that history of from the Bible and not from the Muslims. And it would be important to help any converts that's coming from Muslim religion to show correctly how this prophet is Jesus and not Muhammad. And also, Jay, it's very important. God of the Bible has a son. Only Allah has a prophet. And the son is greater rank than a prophet. Jesus is a prophet, but he's a son, and Muhammad is not. So this would really anger if you were in a situation where it'd be dangerous to stand and you say, Muhammad is only if you granted it, say Muhammad is Allah's, is his prophet, but Jesus is God's unique son, and the son has greater rank than a prophet. But I mean, but we need to be saying that. In America, we don't say that, but we need to. When I was at OCU in Oklahoma City working on my program, my master's, we had the conflict between the Shah of Iran in Persia, in Iraq, in Iran, and the Anatolis, the mullahs, and they were the mullah. He was still in France, and there was between the students that they were divided. Some were pro Shah, some were for the mullah that would ultimately come, and they would fight and beat one another up. It's terrible, a terrible scene. And my answer was, one is going to replace the other, and whoever wins, you're going to beat up and kill the other person. But they went to these friends, they were Muslim friends. They went to the movie, came out about Jesus, and then they heard the bishop speak. It's a Methodist university, speak. And you know what they said to me? They said, Bob, Christianity has no advantage over a Muslim. Allah has a prophet, and nobody stood up and said, but God has a son, and the son's greater than a prophet. The university didn't take a stance that would divide the Muslims and the Christians. They left it more of a neutral, so you could be either, so that the Muslim guy could say, I listened to your bishop, and your bishop said nothing that would make Jesus superior to Muhammad. And it's not, for us, it's crucial that he's the creator, he's the priest. Okay, thanks for mentioning that, Jay, on Deuteronomy 18:15, that interpretation. Any other questions? (9:17).
My question is not answered, sir.
Okay, give me your question again.
No, I asked where Jeremiah.
If you listened, I told you the answer. Let me.
Maybe
What I said was, I have to look up the reference. It has to do with Jeremiah coming from a city of priests. I'll add it to the chart. Here, I know I have to do that. And last night, my eyes, when my eyes get tired, I just quit. And
sorry.
I will give you that answer. You have a right to ask. And I knew it was missing, but I will continue to flesh out. You know, these charts, they just don't pop up. Chuck knows how they are, but they have to come in my mind first. So I had a bad day yesterday. But anyway, so when I'm sitting in the chair and I shut my eyes and I'm creating this chart in my mind, and I'm working through these different areas, possibilities. And then so I knew, ups, you know, I knew how to come up with the priest. Well, I had to go looking and read through Leviticus and Numbers and find Joshua. I had to read all of that through the concordance. And then the king stuff I knew from just memory. And the prophet stuff I knew. And I knew how to take Hebrews 1 and link that in there. So, but I have to do all this stuff. And then I knew that I got to find Jeremiah. But once I saw that it was easy to show that Moses was both a prophet and a priest, once that's valid, then you can show that Jeremiah can be a priest. I'll find that for you, Capo.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I really
I will
appreciate
also try.
I appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys. I have to have all my life, I have to have a driving force to keep me studying. So when I found that I was slack in my studies, I would start a new class, and that gave me the motivation to study. So likewise with you guys, you're my motivation to get me at my mind working on the scriptures and trying to figure out how do I communicate them to help others learn. Any more questions? Well, when you read chapter 3, we'll come back to chapter 3. When you read chapter 3, you look at why should you focus on Jesus and not Moses? Well, Moses is just a servant. You know, I didn't go looking for O.A. Gar when I went to Oklahoma City. I'd go looking for somebody that lives in the house, the owner of the house, you know. I want to see the one that saved Moses, you know, not just Moses. I want to see Moses, but I want to see the one that saved Moses, the Lord Jesus. So I want to focus on Christ Jesus. So you'll see that as you work your way through chapter 3. This is a wonderful book. I'm so glad that 1981, for some reason, I got drawn into the Epistle to the Hebrews and started studying Hebrews. Can you believe it, Jay? 40 years ago, I started studying Hebrews before you were born.
Yes. Right.
So, anything else you want to? We can just visit if you want.
No, Bob.
Sir, I want to ask, sir, yesterday I visited that, that our viewers who, got accident, means who,
Yeah,
so,
the husband was killed. Yeah,
yeah, so many people, some people means most of the people came there from Hindu background. So I just prayed and said that, we prayed for, peace of his spirit. So many people ask me that where the spirit goes, because according to the Hindu people, they think that, spirit come back and, born in different, like,
Yeah.
beast or animal, according to their,
Yeah.
like.
Well, so I would say there are two great passages to work on with them. Obviously, you have to have the distinction between the material and immaterial, the person, the spirit and the body. So they would need to know that we believe that both are holy. Now, if I'm a Hindu, I remember, Sukumar, when I was coming to India, I was struggling with trying to understand. We were in the South at one of the conferences, and I read an article on a Hindu man, and he was an elderly man, a wealthy man, and he was a Hindu man of faith, in Hindu faith, and he went to the Ganges River. How do you say the word? The river, is it
Ganges.
Ganges? He went to the
Yeah.
Ganges River, and he's going to die by the river. And so this is what I learned from him. He had given instructions for his body to be put on a little raft and float in the river and let the alligators get him, the crocodiles. So his body didn't make any difference. And then when he died, being a perfectly obedient Hindu and believing in reincarnation, believing that he had reached the highest level of reincarnation, that he would ascend into heaven and be absorbed into the oneness of God. All right? Nirvana. Are you with me?
Yes,
So
yes.
this is Hinduism. Now, I took that and then I compared it to Christianity. Number one, you can have the body burned like many Indians would do, health-wise, for example, cremated, whatever you want to say, or put on the crocodile, wherever it is, like the spaceship that blew up here with people aboard on it. If their bodies are scattered over the ocean, that's no problem for God. Number one, God is going to raise the body from the dead. So that needs to be communicated. The body is not something that's abandoned. Second, that the soul remains alive. Paul said two things. He said to be absent from the body is to be what?
Present with God.
Yeah, I mean, we need to comprehend when we see our dear friends in front of us. Sunday, we went to church and there were 20 or 30 people died in our church last year. And they had pictures of each one of them. And suddenly there's my friend Tom. He's up there with a big picture of the smile. And, you know, he's with the Lord. His spirit is not dead. It wasn't absorbed to the oneness of God. When the error I found in Christian theology in India was that when the spirit went to heaven, they misinterpreted 1 Corinthians 15. It's no flesh and blood's going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. And that means that's a synonym for a lost person. That doesn't mean that the kingdom is not going to be there with a real human body. So they had wrongly interpreted. So when they went, they said that when Jesus ascended to heaven, he ceased to exist. He was absorbed into the oneness of God. I learned this era. There was a doctor from one of the Christian universities with Spurgeon. I had a class of all faculty members, and for a week or two. And in Hebrews, he stood up and said, "Sir, Jesus lacks nothing." I said, "Sir," I said, "Jesus is heir apparent. Sukumar is alive and his three sons are alive. And if they come home and get his car and his mother says," and he says, "Where's my car?" He says, "Your heirs took it." No. An heir can't get it yet. You got to wait till I die, see, before. And so he said, Jesus lacks nothing. I could not understand. So I said to him, "Sir, could we continue this discussion this afternoon when I have the next class?" So Dr. Alman and I, over lunchtime, we could not figure out what's blocking him. And suddenly, all of this reading about Hinduism came to my mind. Oh, if Jesus died and his spirit went to nirvana, he no longer exists as a person. And that's the source of the error in Christian theology. And it's been true of every class that I've ever taught in India, is that they had, without knowing it, had absorbed this error into their theology. So you need to say, now here's another illustration. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13, those that have fallen asleep in Jesus, what's Jesus going to do? He's going to bring, what's he going to bring? Is he going to bring their body or their soul?
The souls.
He's going to bring their soul, the invisible, the immaterial being of man. And they're going to bring him to earth for what reason? To get the body out of the grave. See how radically different Christianity is? We believe that we're not going to be absorbed into God. We are distinct from God forever. You can't join the finite with the infinite. See, but that's very important when you're communicating the difference between Hinduism and Christianity.
Diamond of the phone chain. దయమని కి ఒకసారి ఫోన్ చేయి నాకు చేస్తాను.
Spirit now after death, what the spirit now like after death spirit you said last time.
Mind, will, emotion, conscience, appetites. That's the personhood, the self-consciousness. You know, maybe one day I'm going to deal with a part of a lesson on the center of self-consciousness, personhood. But I know that you look at your body, you say, well, I'm not my arm. I'm more than my arm. And you look at your friend's body and you say, something is missing. What is it that animates that body, that makes it alive? It's the spirit.
The spirit.
Or I'm using spirit and soul interchangeably right now. So we have this invisible part that thinks and reasons, that goes to heaven to the presence of Christ. So Jay, we don't believe in soul sleep. The body may sleep in the dust, but not the soul. It's animated, that it's alive, and it's in the presence of God. So to this family and to these Hindus, you have to show, here's a wonderful opportunity where death can show the advantage that a Christian has over a Hindu. If they want to stay with their Hinduism, then they believe in that they cease to exist. There's no future joy. They won't see their loved ones again. But we have this great joy of seeing our loved ones again. Yeah, you understand?
Thank you, sir.
One of the people was traveling in his church and is in a car wreck and he died. So he is dealing with a family and with the Hindu members of the family that come. So that's the background for Jay's question.
Okay. Brother, you have to correct this 13 minor. You have to make it 12
Thank you, sir.
prophets.
You know, what happened was there is that you didn't count my epistle. Yeah, I'll check that. Last night, when I put that in there, you know, I all this was floating in my mind, and I wanted to get it documented, right? Because this is really for chapter 5. It goes in the notes in chapter 5. But when I thought about the introduction to Fix Your Mind, I thought, you know, here's the problem. The Jews going to have to give up the priest, the king, and the prophet. So I thought it works well in chapter 3. But anyway, so I wanted to get it documented. So and when I put that 13 there, and I said, my, I haven't looked at that in forever. You know, it's something this is my first mistake, Sukumar.
Every time you're caught, you say that is the first mistake.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh.
So
Yes.
I have got some references for the Jeremiah as priest. His father was Hilkiah, and he was the descendant of priestly family.
Yeah, right.
That
That's
is
right.
written in First Chronicles 6:45 to 46.
Good. I'm so
And
glad that, you know, I'm so glad.
26
Yeah.
First Chronicles 26, 10 to 11.
Thank you.
You might stop recording, Bob.
Oh, okay. Gotta get to Zoom here.
Maybe because of that, he's also priest. He was born as a priest and acted as a prophet, like.
Yes, yeah, that's the point. He is a priest, and they